Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Untitled Reviews. This being a show where I talk about dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the series premiere of Walker Independence. A great series premiere. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, obviously I went into this having some idea, knowing that this was a story of, well, I guess not as much revenge, but more so about justice. And that this was the beginning of, obviously, well, the trailer kind of made it seem like, okay, I knew that going into this was a Davidson and Walker situation. First and foremost, I didn't realize how far back things went. Like, even in the original show, we know how, like, we've touched on the Davidsons and Walker's history. I mean, not even like the more present day stuff. I mean, like, hinting that there's been beef for a while and knowing that this is where it started with, it's like, ugh. I mean, which is sad because it's like, right, the Davidsons were already kind of painted in a more villainous, they were in an antagonistic route, but, now it is a situation of knowing like, oh, they first wronged the Walker family. That we know of. We don't know, maybe they were wrong. Like, there's always been this back and forth, but knowing it started with the Davids, potentially, because the Walkers are once again painted in a better light. They did some stuff. I mean, but they were less in the wrong in comparison to the Davidsons, as we kind of learned last season, just a lot of the moves that they were making, so. But I love how cheeky this show is, because there's a lot of well, for one, her husband's, our main protagonist, is Abigail, played by, Catherine McNamara, who played Mia in obviously in the Arrowverse. So it's just, I conflated that. I was messing that up big time. Either way, tangents and all that aside, her playing Abigail, which was like, oh, interesting. And what's her husband's name? Liam. I'm like, of course. Look at you being a little cheeky, but it is sad that, like, it's just like, wow, without hesitation, killed him in cold blood. But they did set up the fact is Abigail felt like her husband was hiding something. It's like, the fact is that he left behind Boston because of its corruption and stuff like that, wanting to start over in independence. And now it's like, she's like, why? It felt like you were hiding something. He's like, I will love you more than you will ever know. That's the only secret I'm hiding. Seems like that's not the case, considering the fact is Tom Davidson went through the trouble of murdering you like he did. Not only to kill you, because not only was her husband supposed to be the new sheriff, he not only killed him, it's like he also took the position. And like I guess it's like, oh, let me show up here and be like, yep, I'm taking the job because your previous sheriff didn't show up. Because there was like a week in between him, because she was out for 4 days when she was found by Callian, and the elders there ended up helping her recuperate, so she made her way to independence, which even he avoids being an independence just because it's like, yeah, Apache being seen with a white woman, that's not gonna be seen very nicely. But as she's making her way through, she's meeting a lot of other characters. Like, we meet Hoyt, which I looked it up. I don't know if they said his last name in the episode, but apparently his character's name is Roland, so I'm like, okay, so this is definitely, which I think is kind of pretty neat. Obviously, Matt Barr didn't get to play Hoyt for too long. Well, I mean, he obviously did for a little while, but being able to have this opportunity to kind of play a similar version of the character, kind of your kind of scandalous criminal who's kind of got a little bit of a heart of gold to some extent, not full-blown Robin Hood or anything like that, but just like, Hoyt, in Walker was like, just trouble. He always found a way to mix himself up in trouble, but he, had a good heart. So meeting him, he was pretending to be a preacher, and it's like, this guy was going to kill him because it's like, oh, at least let me tell you, I'm not the only one. Your wife isn't the only person I've slept with, so there's that. And he gets the guy to confess, like, oh yeah, there was like a whole thing at like he lost the money betting, and it's just like, oh, because like confess to me, I've always been one to understand you, and that was the most frustrating thing for the guy. He's like, the problem is you've lied to me, you used me, you slept with my wife, but damn it, you're so right. You are the only person who could always see through me and know me. So I took that opportunity, knocked the dude out because he was burying his own. The guy was forcing Hoyt to dig his own grave. Took off with the horse, who, of course, once again, the show being cheeky, named the horse Cordell. So, but he's in a relationship with Lucia Reyes? Yeah, Lucia Reyes, which I was immediately hearing the last name Reyes. I was like, isn't that Cassie's last name? So I was like, oh, was that supposed to be her ancestor too? And I'm like, man, we were just like throwing out names here and there because I was like, that's so interesting that you would. I was like, that's fascinating. So I'm like, which is so interesting, just showing like how deeply rooted these connections are. They might have gotten severed over the years and just everyone going their separate ways. But it's just interesting to know all these families are so connected because like the Rollins aren't something like Hoyt's family. We only heard a little here and there about how why it's almost symbolic too that an Abigail would take sympathy on Hoyt. It's like because like Cordell's mom and Cordell and Liam's mom Abby like took like she always saw the better side of Hoyt than other people, and Cordell was kind of the same way too. But it was such a fascinating thing that history kind of now I guess we could say history ended up repeating itself to some extent much later down the line. But my point, what I was saying was like we don't really know too much about Hoyt's family, only that he did not have a great upbringing. That's also why Abby was so like sympathetic towards him because his family situation wasn't good. So we know next to nothing of the Rollins. They never really popped up in Walker. So, but yet again, a Rollins and a Walker kind of like getting caught up in like because that was always like Cordell's thing. Like whatever Hoyt got mixed up in, Cordell would kind of follow. So the fact is, later on, Hoyt's like robbing a bank and Abigail kind of goes along with it. She's like, oh, you better be careful, and kind of gives him a nudge about the guy with the gun. And then she's like, right, what do you want to do? Add kidnapping to it. And he was just kind of like, what? And so he ends up kind of inadvertently kidnapping her as well. So, and the guy he ended up running into, I think that was, it was only for a quick second, the guy that like pulled out the shotgun or whatever on him. I'm like, oh, is that supposed to be the guy he robbed at the beginning of the episode? He's like, oh, you took my, I don't know if that's the same guy. Because the moment he's like, oh, not this guy, there's a guy coming out the bathroom. Well, we know he comes to Independence to like gamble stuff away. So it's like probably not that much of a shock that he show up here. But it is interesting to know that Independence is meant to be this place where everyone kind of starts fresh because everyone's running from something and everyone's circumstances have led them here. Like you've got a character like Kai who is like, right, he's, he's from Macau and he came here and obviously it's like, oh, building a railroad. You're like, oh yeah. It's like, that was sadly a pretty big situation for Asian people in this country at that time, you're like, damn, but for him, he sees it as an opportunity like, oh, build on a railroad, learn as much I could about, learn as much English as I could and open my own business, and you're like, which also, Kai being played by Lawrence Cow, which I was like, oh, because I know he's done Just Kidding. I mean, not like recently, but, fairly recently enough that I know he's been on Just Kidding News. Like, he was, kind of doing a little promo for, I think, the Wu Assassins related movie on Netflix. Was it like Fist of Vengeance, I think? I don't know. Maybe he brought it up. I don't remember him talking about being on Walker Independence. Either way, so I was kind of surprised when I saw his name in the credits. I was like, oh, I'm Lawrence Cowell. That's crazy. I also, for whatever reason, thought he was in Shadow Hunters. That being the show Catherine had done like prior to her. Was she? Yeah, I think that was like before all the like Mia in the Arrowverse stuff. So I was like, oh. For whatever reason, I thought they were in the show together. It's like, no, he wasn't in Shadowhunters. So I was like, oh, I don't know why I thought that. Either way, they also kind of hint the fact is he might have a thing for Kate, especially the way he was watching her when she was kind of doing her dance. But she definitely seems like she's a bit of an enigma too, like what her whole deal is. Because there's that telegram at the end of the episode where I am assuming like, I don't know whether that's, because it said to Alan, what was it, Pinkerton or something like that? And it was like a note saying like, oh, the new sheriff, it's presumed, Liam Collins, presumed dead. The new sheriff sworn in, buying up a whole bunch of land. And I'm like, I don't know whether she was sitting there to spy on the situation there, like whether she's kind of undercover or did she intercept someone else's, like, no, because I was like, I don't, not less that, no, because I was like, not, I don't think, well, she was initially, Abigail was going to send out a telegram, so I'm curious, was that her and did Kate intercept it? But I'm like, no, like, considering where she is at in the episodes, like, why would Abigail, like, still go through with that? Like, it still could have been someone she was reaching out to. I don't know. Why? I mean, I guess to keep anonymity, like, it didn't seem like her name or anything was written. The only name that was there was like, oh, it's to Alan Pinkerton. And like I said, if that's the name, but I'm like, that's why I don't know whether she's in the middle of that or whether she, like, intercepted that letter from Abigail. I don't know. I also kept wondering, I was like, why does the actress who plays, Kate look familiar? Her name is Katie Findlay, and I was like, oh, looked into it. CW wise, she played Elizabeth on Nancy Drew. I was like, that's why you look so familiar. That's kind of probably the thing I best know her from. But either way, the fact is that she latched onto. I mean, maybe that's just her thing, but the fact is she immediately latched onto Abigail, took such an interest in her, I can't help but be a little suspicious of you just because of that. I don't know. And once again, it's like, right, this is a place that people start over. People are running for something. It's like, oh, what are you running from? And she kind of danced around that question when, like, Abigail, like, bounced it back to her. So we'll have to wait and see what ends up happening on that front. I also, just speaking of casting, I do appreciate the Mark Shepard appearance. And I was like, have I heard him do an American accent before? I was like, maybe Doctor Who a couple years ago, like season 6 of Doctor Who, or series 6 of Doctor Who, might be something where I've heard his him doing an American accent. Huh. I don't remember. I'd assume, yeah, just because of the context of the episode that he was playing an American. But obviously it's like Supernatural as Crowley or even Kip in Doom Patrol. He just uses his natural accent, so I'm not that used to hearing him doing an American. It kind of took me back for a second, 'cause I'm not used to it. It is an interesting reveal that, well, first and foremost, the fact is that Abby got that close to killing Tom. It, like, literally fired a shot off and it grazed his arm just because it's like, well, I guess you lucked out that it's like, oh, I don't know if that's just an old-timey thing or is that just, the fact is that it's like, oh, you're indoors popping off your guns to be like, oh, celebrating the fact that the new sheriff has been, I mean, it gave you plenty of cover fire, but still, luckily, she had Hoyt there to kind of pull her back, but he had asked Lucia about it, and apparently, for one, Tom is from Boston as well, and it's like, wait, what? It's like, so it wasn't just some random thing of him killing your husband. It's like, he's from Boston as well, so the fact is that, but he's also been buying up a whole bunch of land around Independence, and apparently he's, like, I guess his family in general has been stealing cattle because Lucia's family dealing with stolen cattle. And it's like, well, the easiest way for protection is having someone in the family be a sheriff. So I also thought that was so fascinating too, because I'm like, oh, considering like the beef that the Davidsons and the Walkers have about the land, and just once again, it's like this show is doing everything it can to be like, well, you already kind of look at the Davidsons in a negative light, obviously. So like painting them in a worse picture in this case, it's like, once again, this has nothing to do with the descendants. Like everyone's choices are their own, but it is just this blood feud that kind of existed, which I find fascinating. And also the fact is like, right, not all of the Davidsons were, it's like, things kind of mellowed out and everything kind of worked out. I mean, because you also like, well, you have your biased opinion because it's like, well, Jerry's a Davidson, so like, Jerry's not a bad person. And Denise kind of had a rocky start and, rocky moments throughout the season, but it's like, she's not that bad of a person. Her husband's not a Davidson by blood, but he's a, obviously Davidson by marriage, but still, like, he was welcomed in that family, and it's just like, Dan's kind of a dick, but it's like, nah, you're okay. So it's like, even Gail, had her moment. It's a whole thing where it's like, the Davidsons aren't like pure evil, like the way the show is going to probably lean into them being a little more evil, but the fact is, it's like, yeah, you gunned your husband down, but once again, it's probably going to paint the picture of, yeah, he killed your husband for no reason, but then you're going to find out, oh, there's probably some complexities of Leah might have done wrong to him first. Also, knowing that really quickly, keep saying Walker, Walker. It's like, well, the Walkers is a name that she made up. She's a Colin by marriage because of her husband. And I'm curious, like, what her maiden name is then. But the reason why she came up with the name is because of Callian. Like the name they like him and his people had given her was like walks in tall grass, and it's like, oh, she came up with Walker. So, because she didn't want to use when she was going to pull out money from the bank, because she was trying to pull out her money as quickly as possible. Because she's like, oh, my husband set some money here a while back, but she's like, I'm trying to do this before because I know Hoyt's about to like bust in here, rob the bank. But the fact is that she didn't want to use her actual name, because if she did, that drew too much attention, because eventually like the sheriff would hear like, oh, there's a Miss Collins in town. Oh, the wife of the man I gunned down. Oh, and he also thought he killed her too. So, but that was her playing dead. I'm also curious to see what role Lucia plays, because obviously there's a little bit of like at first you're like, maybe there's a little bit of a jealousy thing, because she was asking about Abigail, being like, oh, like who was that lady? He was like, just some woman that's kind of, I'm not, not worried about. But then like off in the distance, she sees them like whispering to each other, and I don't know if that's supposed to be indicative, like, because the flowers she got where like had a whole bunch of money in it. I'm like, either, well, because we know he robbed that bank. I don't know if that was money he had left for her, but like the flowers were from Augustus, I believe. I'm trying to remember who actually gave her the flowers. It was Augustus who gave her the flowers, right? Maybe I'm just being stupid. I'm just not remembering it. So much other stuff happened, and I'm kind of forgetting some of the stuff in the episode. Like real life stuff happened, and I'm just kind of forgetting a little bit about what happened in the episode. But I want to say Augustus is the one who gave her, the deputy. He's the one that gave her the flowers. I'm like, so it was like, was that a payment or something? Like, I guess maybe like she's helping like secretly sell off her family's cattle, and maybe that's what that's all about. I don't know. Maybe she kind of has no interest in the family circumstances and just trying to get paid, or like I don't know, or maybe she's meant to keep an eye on things. I don't know. I don't know if those two, like, that look of like when she was looking at him whispering like, oh, is there something going on between her, because she already believed. She was like, oh, where were you in jail, were you in Mexico, were you in jail in Mexico, kind of what was that, like kind of assuming like might have been a woman in Mexico or something. And now everything between him and Abigail, and considering their circumstances of working together initially reluctantly, I think maybe she might read too much into that, thinking something's going on between them all, the secrecy and stuff. But we'll have to wait and see. But it does once again set up some really interesting things about like, all right, so understanding why, I mean, what Tom is trying to gain from all of this. What is he running from in Boston? What was Liam running from in Boston? I mean, even Abigail was running from something. She talked about running away from her family because they were cruel. So we're like, what's that about? Will they eventually track her down here in Independence? Well, not unless the Pinkerton thing was her, like, not unless that is her, like, maiden name, and she was reaching out to some family, like, maybe Alan or whatever was a sibling or something like that. I don't know. Like I said, I'm not sure how to read that scene, whether or not that was, like, Katie's thing, but it just seemed like her reading it like that seemed like she intercepted that, so. Because she's the one that told Abigail about the telegraph being, introduced to this place, so that's why I feel like, I don't know. Once again, it feels like they're already setting up so many people with their own secrets and their own circumstances, which is going to be interesting to find out everyone's roles and what they've got going on, well, going forward. I mean, because it is the state of things, like, of course, like, no one would know her husband's body's out there, so of course it's been sitting there rotting for, like, the past week, which is, like, heartbreaking, returning to the, the scene, and Hoyt being there with her. Once again, wanted nothing to do with this, because he was like, I'm not about to be in a position where I'm going to have to kill, like, the sheriff for you, like, because he's, like, taking a life. Well, she was like, I know taking a life isn't easy. And he's almost like, yeah, how would you know? She's like, my husband was in the war. And she's like, I see that. Which, it does set up some interesting things, because during one of his earlier games in the episode, well, no, it was like the only like card game he had in the episode, the guy was referencing the Alamo about like the gun he found, was like, oh yeah, like he was like some Mexican, like he's like took it off somebody and I ended up getting it, and you could tell like robbing some, like it's like right, have some respect for the dead, those that died at the Alamo, and the guy who even like. Because I think you see that same dude later on sitting at the same table with, like, I think Augustus and the sheriff. But it's like, yeah, he was kind of calling Hoyt Alamo and stuff like that. And I guess that's why it's like, right, he's a fellow soldier, so he knows what it's like, right? So pay respect to those who have fallen. And maybe that's also why, knowing, like, oh, he was a soldier too, he knew war. Maybe that's even more so the reason why he was like, I didn't know your husband, but I'm sorry for your loss. He was initially reluctant about all of this, but I guess he has his own reasons for getting involved, because obviously the effect it's having on Lucia's family and stuff like that. So he wants to help out. I think that's why he was robbing the place in the first place, to probably like help him kind of recuperate a little bit. Maybe, I don't know. Because that seems like that's kind of a bit of a secret torrent affair. Well, I don't know if affair would be the right word in that case, but it's like, right, they're making sure to hide that relationship from like her family in general, specifically her brother, but I'm sure the same thing's applicable to her dad as well. Because it's like, yeah, probably wouldn't be too happy about knowing Lucia's dating someone like Hoyt. Probably not even just like, oh, the white dude thing, but also like, you're kind of a scumbag criminal to some extent. You're a con man, so you're no good for my daughter type of thing. Maybe a combination of the two. Obviously, it's a first episode. It's just a whole bunch of setup, but I'm really interested to see where things take us going forward into the next episode. How Abigail plans to get her justice, how she plans on stopping Tom. Is she just straight up going to kill him? Or, I mean, how do you prove it? She's like, right, I'm a stranger in this town, and like, no one's going to believe my word against him, especially considering he's the new sheriff, and obviously he's buying up land. He's probably got enough power and connections. I am curious whether Augustus is going to be proved, like he's once again the deputy, so I'm curious, like, is he going to end up being like a decent enough dude? It seems like it. I mean, he seems like he's on the Hoyt, because he's like, oh, I feel like I just saw you earlier today on horseback. So it's like, I know you're the one that who did the robbery. He's also obviously tight with Callahan, but because Callahan was I'm saying Callahan. It's Callahan. Callahan had said that Augustus is a good person, so we'll see. But because initially it's like, hey, like, I'll go looking for that robber, like, moment, like, you know, sun up tomorrow or something like that. And Augustus like, or you can come down now. Like, I guess kind of like, I need you to jump on this immediately. Or was it just kind of him being like, you don't have to be as weary coming into town? It's like, he has his reasons for being wary of going into town and how people are going to respond. So either way, we'll have to wait and see how things play out going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.